Hey, I just wanted to say that I think we're going to start. It's just afternoon. My name is Janice Linton. I'm one of the librarians here at the Neil John Maclean Library. And my specialty is in Indigenous health research. And I work with the Department of Community Health Sciences as well. So I've worked in population health as a librarian for over 25 years now. The last 24 years I've been at the University of Manitoba. And I just love working with students, if there's any students in the room, which I think most of the people that have signed up for this series have been grad students. So welcome, and it's nice to see you again. There may be a few more people popping in and out today, popping into our session. A few latecomers. This is a 1.5 hour session. It goes to 1:30 and it is recorded. So Carolyn Monin is our guest co-host today. She's another awesome librarian here at the Neil John Maclean Library. She's a health sciences librarian, and she's going to monitor the chat for us. So if you have any questions or any needs, you can certainly put that in the chat for Carolyn. And as I said, my name is Janice Linton. My email address is at the bottom of your screen there, janice.linton@umanitoba.ca. I'm doing this series this year with my colleagues, Maylin Lay and Christine Neilson, who are also at this library. And Christine's been teaching you some of these sessions. So without further ado, we'll get started. And just as a reminder, the sessions are being recorded. I will post the recording on the website as soon as I can. It takes us a few days to clean it up, but it'll probably be up in about a week or so. A reminder, please mute yourself and also to turn off your video because it's being recorded. And as I mentioned, the session is 1.5 hours. If you do need to leave at 1 o'clock, it's recorded. You have my email address. You're certainly welcome to contact me or contact us at the Neil John Maclean Library. So a reminder too that we have the Knowledge Synthesis and Systematic Reviews subject guide that we've developed here at the Neil John Maclean Library. It has all of the resources I'm going to talk about today, and it has copies of the recordings of the 5-part series, as well as where you can register for the other parts if you need to. So a reminder, I think most of you came to Introduction to Systematic Reviews. That was part 1. Part 2, Christine Neilson taught us the other day, setting up a search, showing us how to organize our files and get the search organized and to document the work. So important for a systematic review. Today, we're going to look at part 3, Advanced Searching. And then I'll be teaching part 4 next week, translation, which is translating the work we do today, the search in OVID Medline, translating that to other databases, including OVID Embase. Part 5 next week is also going to be using covenants for your systematic review. Christine's going to teach that, and I'm actually going to take that session as well and co-host with her because I'm always learning new things about covenants. It's a wonderful piece of software that the University of Manitoba Libraries has provided for your use. So the goals for today, we're going to look at systematic review searching specifically and the basics of that. An introduction to the OVID interface. We're going to use Medline. That's our standard go-to database first off for many systematic reviews and many scoping reviews. We're going to look a little bit at what keywords versus subject headings. How do we find out what our keywords are going to be? How do we find out the appropriate subject headings? What's the value of each? Hopefully, you'll see evidence of successful search strategies that you can replicate using your own topics and your own research question. The important section today is about hedges, filters, and limits. How do you apply these? These are so important, you know. It's really, really valuable if you can do a really good search that isn't too big, that you eliminate as much of the extraneous information that you're not going to use anyways. There's a lot of ways you can do that using the databases before you even get to the screening stage. So the basics of setting up your search. First off, know your research question. It's really important that you have a good idea of what your research question is, that you've properly formatted it with your team. Remember, it's always a team on these systematic reviews. And then you really take your research question, identify the important concepts, and then those concepts become your search. I also find it's really helpful if I know my inclusion and exclusion criteria. So as a searcher, as a librarian who does searches for some teams, for faculty-led teams, I go to people, if they haven't given me all the inclusion and exclusion criteria that I think they should be considering, I ask them for more. Like, what languages are you willing to screen records in? What languages are you willing to examine full text in? What are your years of publication that you're willing to look at? Why did you pick that date? Those kinds of things. There's a lot about inclusion and exclusion criteria. We'll be identifying the concepts to search from your question. Very, very important. You take your question, break it down into concepts. The concepts become your search strategy. You will also identify filters, hedges, and limits that you can apply. Really cuts down on your work and especially the work of the screeners. So the other part of the basics are the goals of the search. So it's more than just retrieving results. Anybody can run a search and retrieve results. You want to have high precision if you can. So you also, because it's a systematic review or a scoping review, you really need to document your search strategy. And Christine was the librarian helping to outline the importance and some of the tools that you can use to document the search strategy. Each search strategy for each database really must be transparent. It must be reported in any publications where you submit the analysis article or the protocol. And importantly, it has to be reproducible. You need to provide enough details that somebody else could run the same search. You need to provide enough details that if, for example, I'm the peer reviewer of that article, that I can look at the search and I can understand what you did, what date you did it, that kind of thing, and that I could run a search myself. If I'm looking at your publication once it's been published, I want to be able to use your search as a way to build my own searches for my own systematic reviews. Your searches need to be comprehensive. That's really important. We want to make sure we search all databases and everywhere and that we don't miss anything, but we want to balance the high relevance with the best precision. So we want to get lots of results, but we want to try to make them most relevant so that it's easier on the screening and analysis. You need to clearly show the strategy that you use to search each database. And an example of that is in OVID, there's a little tool called the search history, and it can generate your search history just like that very quickly. So that is what you need for your publication, and you don't have to retype the search strategy. OVID will save it and give it to you in search history, and I'll show you how to do that. So a little review here, looking at the question, the research question. We looked at PICO models, population intervention comparison outcome, study design as an example. And so the question is on the right. And the model we chose was PICO, it's on the left. And you would take that question, break it down into the PICO model, filling in as many areas as you can. And that helps you develop your concepts. You've taken a great question, really good research question, and you've broken it down into concepts, and then we go and search the concepts. Another model was Spider that we looked at, and there's more than just these three models. And this is an example of maybe something for a scoping review. What are the experiences of young parents in attendance at antenatal education classes? And in this case, somebody might have used the Spider model. Another one we looked at last time was the PCC model, looking at population, concept, and context, very popular for scoping reviews in nursing. And so this is an example of what the question would look like. So why are we focusing on the OVID databases today? University of Manitoba Library subscribes to 4 different databases in OVID, one of them being Medline. A lot of people who are listening in today maybe have searched PubMed, which is the public version of Medline. We actually pay, even though it's freely available through PubMed, and that's what we teach a lot. We also, for systematic reviews, and this is librarians voted for this, that we like Medline on OVID because it's more efficient for us when we're doing systematic reviews. So if we're doing searching, it's really nice to be able to search one portal, OVID, to search Medline, and then to run the search in Embase. And then if we need to, we can use it for PsycInfo and Global Health. I think that if we could get more databases on OVID, which we can't get all of them, we can't get CINAHL, for example, the nursing database on OVID, but if we could, we would, because we don't really like it on EBSCOhost, but that's EBSCOhost owns CINAHL, so that's our choice. But the other thing is that OVID is one portal, so a lot of what you learned today, you can actually use if you need to search those other databases. The big difference is in Medline, they use medical subject headings, often referred to as mesh terms, something that's probably a common name to you. You probably have heard that. Mesh is, of course, used in PubMed as well. Over in Embase, they have their own index of terminology. They call it the M tree, and it is its own thesaurus. So the term for a medical concept in Medline using mesh will not necessarily be the same as in Embase using M tree. And they're both really important databases for systematic and scoping reviews. PsycInfo has its own thesaurus, as does Global Health. So the first thing I like to do is, I don't focus so much on the search, but it's important to see what we're searching for. If you understand what we're looking for and what we're looking at in our search results, this is really helpful for when you're documenting your search and you're mapping out what your search strategy is going to be. So this is an example from OVID Medline, and it's an example of a record. And a record is one record is really a citation or a reference to a document, to a full article. So in the database, you get a record. In Medline, there's 29 million records. So what you want to do is you don't want to look at all 29 million. You want to do a good search strategy so that you get a good set of results. So in this case, what I did was I searched out tuberculosis. I searched it out in the title and abstract field only. So when I brought the record up to take a little bit closer look at it, it highlighted tuberculosis in the title because that's what I searched for. There is other information there that's useful to me if I'm helping you with a search or if I'm looking for a specific article. But most of the information is not that necessary to you. You're interested in the title mostly, the abstract, and the subject heading. So we've got up to half the record, and I'm just going to flip to the rest of it. Here's more of the record. So we started with title at the top, and now we're looking at other components of the record. Once again, some things you don't need to know, but you might be interested in the medical subject headings. So I looked for tuberculosis in the title. It happens to be a subject heading. So if I scroll down here, there's tuberculosis. In fact, they looked at it specifically around diagnosis and epidemiology, but it is actually a subject heading. I can tell it's a subject heading because there's a slash there. That tells me it's a subject heading. It also says up here, these are the subject headings. So these are, if you look at humans, that's one of the filters or limits that you can do when you get too many records about tuberculosis. You can also filter by region, by age. Here is some other subject headings. The ones with the asterisks on the left are quite important. So wildfires, air pollution, tuberculosis, and air pollutants. That means this article these are the primary concepts, are the ones with the asterisks on the left. And they just let you know that this is what mostly this article is about. Keyword heading is another field that will be of interest to you when you carry out your searches. In this example, Climate change was what the author put in as one of the keywords. So the author said, I wrote the article, these are the topics I think the article is about. So the author has put down climate change. Now up here, no, the indexer didn't put in climate change, but this is really important so that if we just focus on subject headings, we just focus on subject headings, then we wouldn't have got this article if we were just looking at climate change. But because we did a search perhaps using keywords as well as subject headings, we would find this. So this is kind of important information, and it'll make more sense as we go through a search. If you look at the abstract, this is what you'll be screening, of course, if you're a screener on a team. In this case, it's highlighted the term tuberculosis. Once again, this goes back to I searched for this term in the title and the abstract, so it's highlighted that for me. So common fields for searching, and this is also, there's a million fields in each database, in each OVID database, for example. The fields might be different, but these are the common ones. So when you're looking at somebody else's search strategy, maybe you look at somebody else's systematic review to find out what their search strategy looked like. Maybe you're doing a review on tuberculosis. Somebody else did a review on tuberculosis. You're doing a different aspect than they are doing, of course. You might look at what their search strategy looked like. So these are the common fields. This one is searching tuberculosis in title, similar to the previous screen. This one, searching it only in abstract. This one searches tuberculosis in multiple fields. And that would be title and abstract as well as some other fields. So, and we could also search tuberculosis in both title and abstract. And we can also search tuberculosis as a subject heading, and that's with a slash at the end. So these are pretty common when you're building your search strategy. And these are things that you can try different variations of. Does the MP field work better for you, or should you narrow it with title and abstract? This is very, very common, these sets. And I know this might be hard to see, but I think I've made it as big as I can. So talk about subject headings. And once again, when you go into these databases, you'll have the option of searching the subject heading or searching everything under the subject heading as well. So the example that I use to explain this concept to people is the topic is Canada. So if I'm interested in something in Canada, I can choose to just search Canada, which is 105,000 results, or I can explode it and it'll search all the provinces as well. So I'll get more than 105,000 results. So this is really helpful. If you're searching, say, diabetes, if diabetes was the index term, you could choose to search only some types of diabetes. You could search all types of diabetes. It depends whether you explode it and search everything underneath, or whether you just want to focus on some. So this can be very helpful. And so the other thing is that in all of these thesauri, you see above, so you see a broader category as well. If your category is too narrow, you might say, well, I'm going to focus on all of North America, including all of Canada, as well as perhaps Mexico and the United States. So this is another way that you can sort of look up and see, do I need to broaden my search? Would it be helpful to narrow my search? Am I interested in only some of these, or am I interested in all of these? And so that's the difference between explode is very, very popular in searches, or focus. So how do you go from the research question to the concepts? So in this case, can Lyme disease be prevented by treatment with antibiotics after one's been bitten by a tick? And this is a systematic review. So there's our research question and what type of review it is. So the PICO model, this might be an example of a PICO model used for this question. as our population is humans bit by a tick. So we're only interested in those people who have been bitten. The intervention and antibiotics as prophylaxis. The comparator, maybe we will find some studies that include population, those that have been bitten by a tick and those that haven't been, or those that have been bitten by a tick and given antibiotics for prophylaxis versus those who were not given antibiotics. The outcome, we might be looking at the prevention of Lyme disease. And the design also, the study design can be helpful as well. So for a lot of treatment type questions, a lot of basic medical questions, as opposed to broader health sciences. So for a lot of basic medical questions, we might just focus on limiting to randomized controlled trials or clinical trials, controlled clinical trials. So sometimes we do that, right, to get the highest level of evidence and bring it all together for knowledge synthesis in the review. So that might be valuable for medicine, might not be as valuable for other health topics. And so this is what an OVID search strategy looks like. So if we use the databases from A to Z from the University of Manitoba Libraries list, we can go to Medline under M for Medline, and it can take us into the OVID database. And these are also listed on the Neil John McLean Library website. So this is the basic interface. There are no searches yet. Haven't done any searches, so there's no search history yet. There's some other tabs up here. We don't actually really need them right now. We're focusing on journal articles, which is the key to knowledge synthesis. Up here, we can try the new OVID interface. It just looks a little fancier than the old one, a couple more bells and whistles. I stuck with the old one for this session, but you can actually start a search and then click on try the new OVID interface. And it takes all of your search so far and it puts it into the new OVID interface. They both look pretty much the same to me. There haven't been that many changes. It's a little easier to see them sometimes. Another feature up here is my account. I would strongly suggest that everybody, when you go into OVID, if you haven't already, set up your own little account. And that's where you can save your searches. You can store search strategies there. And it's so helpful. So you click on this, pick your account name, it can be anything you want. And then you also provide a password. And then whenever you go into OVID, any of the OVID databases, you can click on my account and you can go into that. What I've done is I've done a lot of reviews over the years, done a lot of searches. So I've set up several accounts. So if I'm doing a systematic review this year, I would set up an account for that specific systematic review. If I do another systematic review next year, I would set up another account and to store my searches. I might set up separate accounts as well for other things that I might be working on because I can store searches. A couple of other things here are, it's really important that you make sure if you want to be in Medline, you are in Medline, because this is a pretty small line of text. Just reminds me I'm in Medline, I'm not in Embase. We set up some defaults here that it automatically will map your term to the appropriate subject heading in whichever database you're in, if that feature is available. There's a section down here with common limits. Common limits might be focusing on just English language results. Another common limit might be humans. There are some other ones as well. I don't tend to use the other common ones. I use humans or an English language, once again, if I need to. Publication year is also important. And some reviews might go back 20 years. Some reviews don't put in a publication limit because you want to go back to the first iteration of the database. And in Medline, it's 1966 for the Medline records. But they do include other resources, not as comprehensively, but they do have older resources as well. And in a database like PsycInfo, the references go back to like 1800s. So you may want to put in a publication year limit or not. And those are things that you can ask your team. So once we typed in Lyme disease, let's go back here. So I put in Lyme disease here. I let it map to the subject heading. And this is what it presents. So it gives me Lyme disease in the index. Out of the thousands of terms, it's found. I call it Lyme disease. Medline has a subject heading called Lyme disease. I can click on here to look at the scope note. And so that's what I'm going to do. So here's a scope note. So I've clicked on the information icon. There's a scope note for Lyme disease. It tells me it's a subject heading, a mesh heading. It tells me a little bit about it in this case. It also has some information here that's quite important. So it used to be called Lyme arthritis or arthritis, infectious during these periods. It's now called Lyme disease. So if I need to go back to 85 or earlier, I might need to put in the subject heading as well, just to make sure. These are the index terms. So if I type in Lyme arthritis, it should take me to Lyme disease as the proper medical subject heading. So I've gone back a page to my index. I've just gone back one page, and I have the option to explode or focus. Now, it's really important that I actually look to see, what does explode mean for Lyme disease? Explode for Lyme disease is going to look different than explode for diabetes, for example. So I don't automatically explode until I've done a little bit of exploring. So this is, I've clicked on Lyme disease, and it's given me where it sits in the index. So it sits near some other infectious diseases. So the broader term would probably be infectious diseases. It said to me, okay, you're interested in Lyme disease. There's the scope note again, in case I need to look at it, in case I didn't look at it on the previous screen. There's how many records have Lyme disease as the label to describe it. Here's the subheadings. So I could focus on different types of Lyme disease. So what I might do is explode it because I'm interested in Lyme disease. The subheadings, there's not that many records. The only one I probably am not interested in is the post-Lyme disease syndrome, and there's only 50 records. So this year I might say, well, I'm just going to explode Lyme disease, just look for everything. I'm good with that. A few years from now, this category might have a lot more papers in it, so maybe I would leave that one out. So once I've gone through the selection of Lyme disease and I've chosen to explode it. So now here's our search history. So it's explode, Lyme disease. We know it's a subject heading because it's got a slash that's been embedded for us. We know EXP means explode. And then what I would do is I would probably do a keyword search as well. So my keyword search, I picked Lyme disease as just a keyword. I also had done a little bit of looking around, and I found a couple of other terms that might be helpful instead of Lyme disease. I've chosen to put it in brackets with a .mp. So this will search for this term or this word in any part of the record, in multiple fields of records. So if you look at the results here, the one with subject heading is 11,996. The one with keyword search is, of course, more records have been retrieved. And then we would say, I'll take Lyme disease as a subject heading or as a keyword. So I'm searching 1 or 2, and that's the total I get. And these are helpful because maybe I'll go broader. I'll go for this total first to start with. But if I find that the records are irrelevant, I don't have a good retrieval rate, of relevancy, then I could maybe go back and change that. My second concept from my question is I'm looking at antibiotics as prophylaxis. And once again, we just let it do some mapping for us. And it has said, okay, you say antibiotics, MESH says antibacterial agents. That is the medical subject heading. I would never have thought of that. In this case, I chose to explode it simply because I showed you in the previous example how we can click on antibacterial agents, find out all the different agents that are underneath it, all the different types of antibiotics. So I've chosen to explode it. I'm going to search antibiotics as a keyword. So here I've checked off both boxes, hit continue, and it takes me through. So here our search history is getting bigger. We're getting some more information here. So I actually chose to start using some truncation. And so we can use the asterisks in this example to search for antibiotic, singular, or antibiotics with an S. So it had given me antibiotics with an S. I actually chose to make a change there. And I'm still searching multiple fields, but I added an asterisk. I'm searching the subject heading. I exploded it. So there's my second concept. Now, my third concept, I've started to type in down at the bottom here. I'm looking for prophylaxis or prevention. So once again, I put it in brackets to search for prophylaxis or prevention, because they're similar concepts. And I've chosen to use an asterisk at prevent. So it'll search for prevention, preventative, prevent, prevents. And once again, I'm just going to search multiple fields. So once I've done that, now, once again, I look at my research question. Here's my concepts. So Lyme disease is at number 3 now because it's 1 or 2. My antibiotic or antibacterial agents is number 4. And my third concept being prophylaxis. So when I search those this time, I'm combining them to bring all 3 concepts together into my retrieval. And that's where I would use and. And this is just what it looks like, 3, 4, and 5. You can't see it on this screen, but over here, there's a little tab that says expand. You're given the first 5 lines of your search. And if you click on expand, you can see everything. So there's a little tab over here called expand. So we've started with almost 12,000 on Lyme disease. We added in the keywords through or, came up with 17,000 for our disease. Looked at antibacterial agents, we have a lot there, and prophylaxis. But when you combine all these, 3 and 4 and 5, we get 522. So out of 29 million, we have 522 for the analysis for one database. So then what I do is I go back and I look at my research question again, and I think, did I miss anything? So maybe I should look at ticks, not just tick bites. So I'm going to add in ticks. So I can explode ticks to be different types of ticks. Just let you look at this screen for a second. So at this time, I thought maybe I should look for ticks. Maybe I should look at that. So I've exploded ticks, the subject heading. There's 23,000. And I'm going to combine it with just prophylaxis, not prevent, as an example, because this is where I'm drafting my search. It's not the final search, but I'm coming up with some different search strategies, and then I'm going to compare them to see which is better. So in this case, I still have my 522 from the original search. That looked like a good search, but then I looked at my search strategy. So now I'm combining ticks with prophylaxis as well as Lyme disease. So I add in 3 for Lyme disease, 7 and 8. So 3, 7, and 8. I get an additional, or I get 85. So what I did was I looked at 6, which is my original 522, or 9, which is the 85. I want to see how many extra I can get. So this time I got 538. So what I'm trying to do is figure out, is this useful? These 85, are the 85 really useful? So of course, some of the 85 are in the 522. So I want to find out, what about the unique ones? So I want to compare the 522 with the 538. So I want to find out if the 16 here that aren't here, if those are actually useful. Is it actually worth my while to do this extra search strategy? So this is where I say, well, 538 subtract 522. So I want search number 10, but not search number 6. So this is an example, and it's really important of how you can test. So you can do a search strategy, and you can test whether the change you just made is actually worth it. And so it's really important to use not in these types of situations if you want to test. So it identified the 16. So I'm trying to find out the 16 unique ones. And I would take a look at them. The search results are just below. This is the search history. And just below here would be the actual search results. And that's where I would look at the 16 and I would say, am I getting something here that I didn't get in the original search that I want? And then I would make my decision whether I want to keep, if I want to go with the 538 or the 522. So what do results look like? So in OVID, in all of the OVID databases, this is pretty much how they look. So here you get title. If you click on here, you can get an abstract to go with it to see a little bit more information. If you click on the link here, these are blue links to the full record. That's what we looked at previously when we looked at the tuberculosis example. That was a full record. So if you click on these, you would get the full record if you wanted to look at subject headings. So the other thing is that if it's in square brackets, it usually indicates that this article is not in English. English is being the standard language. It's not the only language. I think Medline covers about 40 languages. So here it indicates it's in French. So this is a good time to go back and look at your inclusion and exclusion. So do I want French language publications? If you do, that's fine. You can get we can deliver publications in any language. So I would say to my team, do we want just English only? Do you want English and French? Are there other languages? I looked at a review yesterday that had about 5 or 6 different languages. So it had a whole bunch of people on the team. So they looked at English, French, Spanish, Italian, Norwegian. And because they were able to have screeners who could screen in those languages. So this is where you can add in some limits. And a lot of people who publish systematic reviews, they don't realize you can actually do your limits to your language back here at the database. So you guys will be way ahead of the game there. The other thing is I'm looking here. This is talking about rodents. This is talking about Lyme disease in Bernese mountain dogs. Once again, I go back to my inclusion exclusion. Oh, we're looking at Lyme disease in humans. So this is a common limit that you can apply. So how do you apply limits? So here, for example, it's important to indicate which search you want to apply the limits on. So in this case, I kept the 538. I felt that the 16 that I was finding out of the 85 were worth it. So I kept the 538 and I started to apply my limits. Down here, I applied an English language limit and a human limit. I'm still staying away from publication years because I'm looking for information on this prophylaxis, and it's okay if it's 20 years old. It's part of my analysis. So I didn't need to apply a limit. The other thing was I don't have a lot of records. So that kind of lets me know that maybe a publication limit or a publication date limit is not necessary. If I had wanted to not just have English language, but if I'd wanted, say, English, French, and Italian, that would be under additional limits. So additional limits, you click on that and you get more choice. This is the standard limits, but you can get more choice. So I could click on additional limits and have more than just a limit to English language. I could pick more languages as an example. So these are helpful. So in this case, I was interested. I just picked this kind of out of the air. I found a systematic review on this actually, and I thought, oh, that's a good topic. I'll just give this a try. So when I applied those two limits for this particular topic, English language and humans, it actually removed 30% of the items that I would have had to screen. So 155 items were removed with just two very easy limits applied in Medline. So this is a very short, basic search. It's a medical illness. It's a clear diagnosis, prophylaxis or prevention, antibiotics, antibacterial agents, also clear medical concepts. So this one, it worked pretty good. Now, this is just a draft search. It's not my final search, but this gives me an idea of what I'm looking at for numbers. 383 instead of 538 when I applied those two limits. And this is really important to do not just draft searches and test searches and a final search. You can really make it a lot easier for you on your screening or for the screeners on your team so that they're not looking at 8,000, they're maybe looking at 2,200. So that can really make a difference. Now, in this case, it took out 30%. That's a pretty high number. So what you would also do is, once again, you run a test. So your test would be, you would say, I'm interested in 10, not 11. So I'm interested in the higher number, not the lower one. So you want to actually check, what did it take out? It may have taken out something that you didn't want it to. And the reason for that is that when they index each item, once they apply a limit, it's indexed. But Medline gets updated every day. So what happens is limits, there's a whole bunch of records in there where there's been no tag put on to say English language. There's no medical subject headings have been applied yet. So you don't want to miss something that was just published. So you may want to take a look at the limits. I know I do a lot of searches in medicine. Often I don't bother with publication dates because I've done a good medical topic search. I don't bother with additional limits for language because there's just a handful and I don't want to miss anything, but I can take things out if I want. So this is where testing also comes into play. Let's say, for example, I'm doing a search on Indigenous people's health. I wouldn't bother to put a limit to humans because if I'm interested in Indigenous people, human, right? The same in Indigenous health, almost everything's published in English. So I usually don't put a language limit on. The more limits you apply, the more problems you can run into. So you're increasing your relevance, but sometimes you take out things that you don't want or that you don't want to lose. So in this case, what I want to look at is, here's the full record again. This one's on tick bite prophylaxis. So I'm like, wow, that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? That's my topic. So I take a closer look at this record. And what I'm doing is kind of on a fishing expedition. So I'm looking at where it came up. So prophylaxis, came up in the title and the abstract. That's because I searched for it in multiple fields. That included title and abstract. I'm looking at subject headings. Yes, I used Lyme disease. Yes, I used antibacterial agents. I didn't worry about the subheadings for this. I just focused on the concepts. I had limited to humans because I felt that would be useful. There's one on tick bites. And I didn't use the term tick bites in my search. So this is where I might take this information, go back and change my search to also include not just ticks, but tick bites. Here's some keywords. They use the term antibiotic prophylaxis. Maybe that's what I'm using as well. They use tick bites, which I'd used as a subject heading, or I could use as a subject heading. They also use tick-borne disease. So I might actually add that in as a keyword, maybe tick with a little asterisk for tick, ticks, or tick-borne with the word disease. And I might actually go back and use this information to enhance my search so I have a better search strategy. So that's the basics of searching in OVID. And we're just going to move into what do you do with your results once you've done a really good search? So you, of course, would store your search, and so you would save it in that account that you had set up. And the other thing that you want to do is when you've got your really good search strategies, then you can export your results. So I want to export everything. So I need to click on here that I want to export all my results. I need to click on here that I want to actually export them. So I've selected the results. I want to export them. This is the screen that pops up. And it's really important that you understand that you always want to export your results as RIS files. Up here, it tells me I'm going to export 383. I always check this to make sure it coincides with what I think I'm getting, just in case I have made a mistake over here. I can also export it in different ways to an Excel sheet or Microsoft Word, for example, but mostly you want to export it as RIS files. RIS is like a universal language between the databases such as OVID Medline, Embase, PsycInfo, Scopus. You can export in RIS files, and that's to import into whatever reference manager you're using. You might be using Zotero to write the paper, EndNote, or Mendeley. Of importance for screening, a really good piece of software is the one that we provide. We provide access to Covidence, an expensive piece of software. So when you get to Covidence, you import your RIS file that you saved. So organizing your RIS files. Now this looks similar to what Christine went over the other day. She said, set up a folder and a set of files just for each systematic review that you're working on. Now this one is only my RIS files. There's a couple of different things in here, but I have another folder within this systematic review that has my notes folder. Usually I have a Word document with lots of screen shares and copies of search strategy in it, notes from emails the team has sent me to say we've changed our criteria, or we're adding this, or we're thinking about this. My notes on what databases I want to search. So I usually have 50 to 80 pages of notes, as well as I've downloaded some articles that use similar methodology to the one that we're using. So if we're doing a realist review, I've downloaded 5 or 6 articles, other realist reviews, so I can check them out to inform my practice for this review. So this one is only my RIS files. In this case, I started searching in 2021, and I've run the search a few times. So I did a search in Scopus. There's just some keywords from my search topic. 209 was what I found. I did a search in EBSCOhost, larger set of records was over 1,000. I also went into ProQuest. I went into Medline. I went into Embase, and I went into PsycInfo because we needed to search all these different types of database. Then the team called me and said, well, we're still working on screening. Could you rerun the search? So I reran the search. So I went and I reran. And these were the unique items to add to this set. These sets, I can't remember what the date was on this one. I think 2000. So then they called me a year later and said, what else has been published? So I reran all the searches. Then I had some other notes in here. I had one that I picked from another database called Alternative Press. I'd run a search in that one because we were using a lot of alternative press type items. Then I had some ProQuest stuff that I had saved as a Word document for some reason. I can't remember. And then here's some more RIS files because then they said, well, we need the search run again. So I ran it again. And these were the unique items that have been added, and the screeners are working on those. And this is just an example of how much work this is. So saving your searches. So it's really important to save your searches, your draft searches and your final searches. You can save as many drafts as you want, and I'll show you that in just a moment. So how do you save a search? You click on what you're interested in. So I want the whole search from line number 1 to line number 11. I'm going to save the whole thing. Somebody else might have said, well, I'm only going to search 1 to 10. I'm going to apply the limits later. So maybe they wouldn't search number 11. They would just search 1 to 10. Once you've picked what you want to save, then you click the Save button. Over here is your saved searches. So that's where they sit. And when you click on this, it'll ask you which account you want to look at. And of course, that's the account that you've set up. If you haven't set it up yet, you have an option to set it up at that point. You won't lose any of this. So saving your searches in OVID. So this is one of my accounts, one that I set up a couple of months ago. I've been working for a couple of months on a search strategy in my spare time. So what I've done is I haven't saved all the searches, but I've saved a bunch of them. So my first draft Medline search. So what I always do is when I save a search, I always say which database it's in, because this is my OVID account. And I will save my Embase searches here, as well as my Medline searches, also my PsycInfo and my global health searches. So I always want to indicate which database it's in. When I go to run this final Medline search, I have to be in the Medline database. And then I run it because it'll give me accurate results. If I run the Medline search in the Embase, if I'm over in Embase and I click on my account and I go in and run the Medline search, I will get some bad results because the subject headings in Medline are not the same as in Embase. So the searches won't be the same. So I have some drafts, some old drafts. So if the team comes back to me and says, did you search this? Did you search that? I usually have notes on a Word document, but to say, yes, I tried this. No, I didn't try that. But I also have often my first drafts. Here I was getting closer. So I think that was like within the same 5-hour stretch that I was forming. It was a very complex, it's actually a very complex search. And then I was doing the Embase one a few days later. So I had some Embase. These are some drafts for some of the more difficult parts of the search. So these are like little notes, right? To say, here I was. Then I started putting A's in front of it. So it would be higher up in the list, because these are closer to my final ones. And this one, I was in the middle of working on tons of subject headings that I had to translate from Medline to Embase. So I saved those because I really needed to go and do something else, right? And then I ran a whole bunch of tests. So this one's just a testing one. And then I've got my final Medline and my final Embase. So I put a 1, so they're at the top of the list. They're out of the A team there. So there's my drafts. There's my better drafts were A's, and then 1 and 1. So I get it up to the top. When you set up your searches, when you click on the little I here, it'll give you a little memory of what your search is. You click over here, you click on run, and it runs the actual stored search for you. So it's a really, really nice way to organize your searches.
Janice, sorry to interrupt, but we had a question that I thought you could answer. All right, well, I know you can answer. How do we decide on how many databases and what databases to be used to search?
Excellent question. Every answer is different for every topic. So what I do is I suggest to students, start with the basics. And so if you go to our subject guide, and I showed this to you last week, and I have a screenshot at the end of this, it lists the top biomedical databases. So if you're doing something in health sciences, you start with Medline. You have to use Embase because Medline and Embase are rivals or sisters or cousins, whatever you want to say. They're not the same. They have some overlap and not. Then you decide, what else do I need? So if it's psychiatric or mental health, you might want PsycInfo. If it's nursing concept, you definitely want a nursing database. If it's pharmacy concept, you might want pharmacy. So you start with what you know. So that would be Medline and Embase, probably Scopus, some combination there. And then probably just talk to a librarian and say, okay, here's my topic. We've got our research question. I've picked Medline and Embase, and I'm going to do some additional searching in Scopus. And then you say, is there anything I'm missing? And a librarian will say, you know what? It's a really great question you have. I would suggest you also look in the nursing database. And here's some tips on how to do that. So I do a little bit of looking at what the librarians recommend on the Neil John McLean page. Then I usually ask a librarian, and I do this quite a bit. So Carolyn is our librarian responsible for dentistry and dental hygiene. So if I have a dental question, I go and I check with her, is there something else I need to look at? And she'll help me, because there's more than just databases. There may also be gray literature or other things as well. So every question has a slightly different list of databases and resources to look in. Now, is that a sufficient answer? And so I'm going to say, I think you might have to start the recording again, or will this record for an hour and a half, Carolyn?
No, it should keep recording. It's okay. Just we've enabled closed captioning.
Okay, thank you. So that's my answer, is that every question is slightly different. And honestly, I just go to somebody with a little bit more experience than I have and say, can you just check, have I covered everything? So I'm just showing you here. So this is my stored searches again. I've clicked on the little I, and this is what it looks like. So in this case, it was 30 lines. I started with some subject headings, and then I combined it with some keywords and subject headings. And then when I got, the population is socially disadvantaged people. So I had to do a lot of work to find different keywords for socially disadvantaged populations. And I had to ask the team, do you mean because they talked about people in rural areas. They talked about people of different groups, different cultural or ethnic groups. They talked about people with different conditions, homeless people, for example, disabled persons. So I had to do a lot of work. So this is only a few lines, but this took me days to come up with this. And I had to look in a lot of different places to even get the keywords. And then I had to translate them with an asterisk here or there. So this actually is only a few lines, but it took a lot of time because I didn't have a filter. I didn't have a filter for disadvantaged populations. I looked around and I couldn't find any, so I had to build my own. So if somebody says looking for someone, social disadvantage for another topic. This one's around cancer. I'll have another topic next year. I'll have a filter that I built. So copying your search history, and this is really important. So we're going to move into this. This is what you include with your publications. So OVID has made it really, really easy in both the new interface or the old classic interface. I can hit copy search history details, and it gives me exactly what my search history was. So for the Lyme disease one, if we just went with this first 11 lines, we haven't made any changes yet. If this was the final search, and often I just copy these, and I like to sort of look at it, just black and white. Okay, what did I use? Is there anything I can change? And sometimes I just look at this, and this is a nice way also. Let's just say you ran a search like this. It's a test search, tried a few things. It's not finalized yet, but we've made an attempt. This is the kind of thing you might want to send to a librarian and say, can you just take a look at this and see, have I missed anything? I only got 383. Does that sound right to you? And I might test a couple different things. The other thing that you can do is you can copy the search history link. So you can send an actual link to somebody, maybe somebody on your team or a librarian or somebody who's going to help you with that search. You can send that, and when we click on the link, it'll run this for us. And that's kind of nice too. And you can also email the search history. So these are really valuable. And I just want to move into some more advanced searching. So we started with, there's number 1 and number 2 here. So advanced search strategies, we map the term to the subject heading. So that's when I typed in Lyme disease, and it took me to the index, and it says, you say Lyme disease, Mesh says Lyme disease, and I mapped it to the subject heading. So that's that little checkbox that we've generated for you so that it automatically does that when you type in your term. And when we get to part 2, this is where we can have some fun. We can do some keyword searching. Now, I showed you some examples where we use .mp. MP stands for multipurpose. I always remember it stands for multiple fields. So it searches a whole bunch of different fields that are very popular, like title and abstract, keyword, author keyword, subject heading. It'll search all those different fields. It's really important to know that MP searches slightly different fields depending on the database. So in OVID Medline, it might search 7 fields. In OVID Embase, it might search 9 fields, and they might be slightly different than the ones in Medline. But MP is sort of multiple fields, common fields where people might want to do keyword searching. So I like MP, to be honest, because I can use the same keyword search strategy in both Medline and Embase without changing the MP. It searches common multiple fields. Other people I know, and this is a very common one, they search title and abstract. So MP is too loose. They want to refine it to search their keywords in only title and abstract. So it searches title abstract fields. This is very common. And if I don't like what MP is doing, I usually switch it to title abstract as an example. It's a comma between title, comma, abstract. Now we go on to another one, KW field. What does KW? Keyword. So if I search the term indigenous.kw, then it has to be an exact match in the author keywords. So the author, remember when we looked at the full record, the author said, I used the keyword indigenous to describe that my work is about indigenous or indigenous people, indigenous concepts, for example. Then whatever I type in here in the KW field has to be an exact match. If I type in indigenous, it only picks up term records where the author said indigenous was a keyword. It won't pick up a record that said Indigenous healthcare services as a keyword, or Indigenous plants, or Indigenous people. It'll only match the exact word. So a lot of people use the KF field. They like that one better. So it searches indigenous.kf. So that one could be an exact match or a multiple word term. So it'll search in the author keyword field, but it could be the author could have put in the keyword Indigenous or Indigenous people or Indigenous health services as an example. So these are all common advanced ones. So population health is an example of an adjacency search. So these examples kind of give you some ideas on how you can do something a little bit more sophisticated if you want. It's really up to you. How often do I use the adjacency? Not that often. Every year or so, I pull this one out and I use it for a complex search, but a lot of times I don't. So if somebody says we're interested in population health concepts, I would say, okay, let's search population health. I can use the adjacency. It just is a reminder that population and health adjacent with no number. This one has a number 1. This one has a number 5, for example. But I can also just search population health, skip the adjacency, and it'll search for population health in the title and abstract. So as one multi-term concept. If I use the example that I search it for adjacency within one, it'll retrieve both population health or health population, because it's within one word within the title and abstract. And this will make sense in a minute. So here I've used an adjacency within 5. I'm looking for the term physician within 5 words of the term relationship. And this is one I used a few years ago because I needed physician-patient relationship. I needed articles with patient-physician relationship. I needed articles with relationship between patient and physicians, so there was a prose, there was a whole line there, and I needed this. So within 5. So what I usually do is when I do within 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whichever number I pick, I can pick any number I want. I usually restrict it to a fairly small field. So I'm looking for this just in the abstract, or I'm looking for it in either the abstract or the title. And if you look here, I've used physician, adjacent 5 relationship in multiple fields, 4,400. And that's too loose. The MP field is too loose for me for this type of sophisticated search. The second one here at number 9, physician adjacent 5 relationship, same adjacency, but I'm only using it in the abstract, gives me a 3,400. If I look in both the title and abstract, it's 4,200. So I would look at these numbers, I would run searches, I would run tests, and I would look at these. I would look at these results combined with my other concepts, right? So maybe I'm looking at physician-patient relationship with another topic, say maternal child health or maternal care, something like that, right? And then I would decide which one I want to use. So maybe I would say, well, I kind of like this one. So once I take this and combine it with my other concepts, I'm not going to get 4,000. I'm going to get maybe, 300, right? So this works kind of good to sort of take a look. And whenever I run this past another librarian, so often I go and I talk to another librarian, I go, okay, I haven't used the adjacency for a while, and this is what I think I'm going to do, but my head's exploding. I got too many terms. This is a very complex search. I just need to talk it out with somebody. And often the librarian will say to me, how did you pick the number 5, Janice? And I go, I don't know. It looked good. I like 5, right? And they're going, well, why not 4? Why not 3? Why not 6? They said, you have to really decide which number you're going to pick. So they recommend that I take the one I like. Maybe I like it in title abstract, or maybe I pick it in abstract. And do my test on this one. Try 3, try 4, try 5, and actually look at. So what I do is I often get to my final search and say I've retrieved 2,200 records in Medline. I'll look at the first 200 to see how my search strategy is really picking at the retrieval of the records. How's it really working out? So I do a lot of testing because that's what I've been taught. You know, I'm really looking for the best precision, but I'm trying to balance it. So most of the time, I use that MP field. Sometimes I switch it up to title abstract. Always run the subject heading search, right? So I have these sort of primary ones. If I want to do something fancy or I need to do something fancy, I might use some of these other tricks, but I don't always do that. You know, the more stuff I put in, more chance I might make a mistake or a typing mistake or something. But I often do a little bit of testing. So here are some other examples. So if I've looked at population with an asterisk, with health and an asterisk, so with an adjacency of 1, it'll bring up population health, healthy population, healthy populations, health and population discourse. So I get a high number here. If I just want population health, the actual term, I don't do an adjacency. I'm just searching it in the abstract. I get a lot fewer. So this gives you some idea of what kinds of tests you can run, and then you combine it with your other concepts. These are some other truncation, some other tips and tricks you can use. And some people pull out, you know, they'll work on this for a week and they love using, you know, the $sign because it does something different than the asterisk. The asterisk sort of is the one that's easy for me to remember. It picks up migration, migratory, or migrated, or migrates, right? Somebody else might like the $sign because it picks up something different, right? Some people say, oh, I'm going to use this little hashtag because it'll pick up woman or women, right? And they just like to do some fancy stuff, right? So I put in some examples. There is an OVID database guide that has, I don't know, dozens of fields. I can't remember how many fields are in Medline. There's dozens of fields and lots of different truncation if you want to get even fancier. And what I want to do is I want to show you here as an example, just once again to reinforce, MP is your broadest field. In this case, it brought up 29,000 records with the word Indigenous anywhere in that record in those common fields. Title abstract smaller. This KF field for kind of a floating keyword is even smaller. And Indigenous as keyword, we said we're looking for the term Indigenous, non-Indigenous people, for example, in the author keyword field. That's the smallest. So this gives you a little snapshot of what you're going to get in terms of results, in terms of numbers. So this can help you decide, where do I want to put something? So how do you find some of these filters? How do you find even more information? You can call your favorite librarian, any of us at the Neil John McLean Library, but you can also just Google OVID database guide. You get the whole guide, you know, and you see the tool that we use when we're building our searches. Same, Embase has an OVID database guide, so you can see the differences between Medline and Embase, for example. Filters. So I showed you a couple of really common filters. And the ones built into Medline and Embase are things like checkbox humans, checkbox English language, publication date. So limits, filters, or hedges. Those are some of the terms used, but it means to reduce your results, increase your precision, use the database, use the tools in the database to actually get you higher relevancy results. And when you're looking for higher relevancy, just as a note too, often people in a systematic review, let's just say they screened 3,000 articles. When you look at their final analysis, it might be 10 articles, because even with the best tools that we can use for precision, it it's still a lot of articles. So it's good to use these tools, and it's good to use limits with caution, to maybe talk it over with a librarian, for example. As I said, you can show us a search and we can suggest a limit, something you hadn't thought about, something your team hasn't thought about. But you can also look around for these. Sorry, didn't mean to move that yet. So here's, as I said, human, English language as an example, or other language, publication date. Popular filters might be clinical trials. Publication type is also really popular. In Medline, they're mostly articles, but I can also share a filter with you so that we remove the letters, except for the ones about clinical trials, for example. You can focus on articles and editorials. You can limit to remove all letters and editorials. We have filters to show you how to do that. And I can show you how to find those filters as well. Here's an example from the OVID database guide. So I went to the OVID database guide and I found a pediatric filter because I don't do that many searches in pediatrics. And they said, well, you can do a keyword filter. So they designed this. And these are more keywords than I ever would have thought of. And so maybe I'm interested in my population health concept, or health populations or healthy populations. So population health and just pediatrics. And so instead of getting 4 million articles, I got 4,000. And that was just two broad concepts I pulled together as an example. And this came from the OVID database guide. And I would cite it. I would say I used the filter from the OVID database guide. Some people, I use this filter and they say, oh, we would never use the term. We're not interested in toddlers and this. We're interested in youth. We're not interested in newborns, boyfriend, boyhood. Those, we don't really need those, right? So they might say, well, take some of these out and I can still use it, still acknowledge that I got it from the OVID database guide. And I could just say that I had edited the filter, that I had changed it or modified it some bit. So finding good filters in Hedges. How else can you do this? What I've been using for the last 6 or 7 years is I go to the American University of Beirut Library. They look for filters, newly published filters on the internet all the time. So they're like the librarians. And so if you click on here, you'll find there's a whole bunch of filters that they've set up. So, and what they do is they said, okay, University of Alberta has some good filters. They put them on their webpage. University of, or Cochrane Library has some good filters for pediatrics. They'll say, here, Cochrane Library has good filters for pediatrics. So they'll list them all. And then you go out to the Cochrane Library or to University of Alberta off their website, but they've organized them. So I just love it. And it's just a quick place for me because somebody comes to me and they say, oh yeah, we only want to, we're only interested in qualitative research, right? We want to do a scoping review and we only want qualitative research. So I have to find a filter or build my own, right? Or say, forget it. So I go and I look. And so these guys have helped me find filters that I never would have dreamed of. Always a good idea to just discuss your filters or your needs for filters with any health sciences librarian here at Neil John Maclean. Filters should always be used with caution. You can filter out too many good references. So you really need to test your filters. And you can modify filters or you can build your own. There's lots of different things that you can use. You can, and remember, you can store your filters, the ones that you like the best. You can store them in your personal OVID account. So they're there when you're ready. So if you're interested in cancer research and you build a wonderful filter or you modify somebody else's filter, you can store those in your OVID account. So you have a filter for Medline would be different than your filter for Embase, but you might draw on the same filters quite a bit, depending on your search strategy or your topics. I work in Indigenous health. I have a whole bunch of Indigenous people's filters for different groups of Indigenous people. So sometimes I'm interested in just the circumpolar North, or maybe just First Nations people in Canada, or maybe First Nations or Indigenous people, Métis or Inuit or Alaska Natives on Turtle Island. So I've built search strategies over the years. How do you find filters? These are just some examples. So I Google a lot. So I type in the term OVID filters because I'm looking for some OVID filters. Maybe I'm looking for some around public health. So this is your keywords, and then this is your topic. Maybe I'm looking for a pediatrics filter. I might type in OVID filters pediatrics. OVID Medline, if I definitely want a Medline filter. OVID Medline, maybe I'll use the term hedge instead of filter. I'm looking for qualitative studies, so I could use the term hedge or filters. Maybe I'm looking for an MBase filter. MBase is in both OVID and also sold directly by MBase at mbase.com. Maybe I'm looking for an MBase filter that can focus on clinical trials or RCTs. So this is what I would focus on. So this is a good way to just find what's out there. Some of them are published and are indexed in Medline. Some of them are validated. Some of them are just suggested. There's lots of, and you can find two different filters for OVID Medline, focusing on qualitative research, for example, and you might just create your own based on a little bit of one or one organization's filter and somebody else's filter. I'm so surprised by how many different filters I found. So like for low and middle income countries, somebody's done filters for that. I do a lot of global health work. That has really helped me. I might do one on HIV/AIDS. I might only do a systematic review on HIV/AIDS services once every 10 years. So maybe somebody's built a filter. It's a great way to find filters and to use other people's work. So we're coming up to the end of the session here. Can I just ask, Carolyn, are there any other questions this time?
Not really. There was a question as to whether we were getting to gray literature. But I sent the library guide on gray literature.
Great. Okay, since we have 5 more minutes, this is sort of the bonus section, right? So this is where we're going to talk about gray literature a little bit. So, and it's also a little bit of a recap. So how do you find all studies and avoid bias? Search multiple databases. We talked a little bit about that thanks to that question that came in earlier. You have to be careful of limits. Once again, we were talking about limits. You always test them. You look around, find the best limit. Sometimes you don't use a limit, just depends. Always make an attempt to find what they call unpublished studies or gray literature. So depending on what your topic is, what the nature of your review is it a systematic review on therapeutics, or is it a scoping review on some aspect of population health? You may look for different types of gray literature. So the other thing is that we talked about storing the searches, because often you need to run the search again just around the time you're writing up that final analysis article or just before you submit for publishing. So you've done the bulk of your work, the searching, the search strategy, the team, the screening, and started writing the article. And you realize, wow, we ran the search last May. Here it is May, and we're just about ready to submit to publication. We're going to knuckle down and we're going to write for the next 3 weeks. Then you might need to update your search. So most of your searching and screening has been done, but you might do a little simple update of the search to find what's been published in the last year. Because you can't have it depends. Some people do need to rerun the search because they haven't touched that, their original search was a year or 2 ago. Some people say, I'm okay with what we've got. And it's fairly fresh, it's only a couple of months old, or it's only 6 or 7, 8 months old. You may or may not need to update your search, but it's the reason why you store your searches over at OVID is because you can simply run them again and find what's new. So talking about databases again, this is just a slide to remind you, not only Medline and MBase are critical, CINAHL might also be useful, PsycInfo, Scopus. Scopus we use for initial searching, we use for additional searching. Sometimes we use for the actual searches for the records that are going to be in the analysis, sometimes not. There's other searches or other databases in Academic Search Complete or in EBSCOhost. One of them is Academic Search Complete. I use that one a lot in Indigenous health. There may be other ones as well. Always good to just talk to a librarian. It's talking a little bit about gray literature. For some people, for me, for example, I search theses and dissertations a lot because the teams I work on, they really want that because there's not a lot of literature in some of the areas that they're looking at, especially in population health, things like nursing education. There's lots of reason why we might want to include theses and dissertations and maybe actually do a search. Reports are also really important from nonprofits, government or non-government reports. Those might be useful for scoping reviews. If you're doing a systematic review on therapeutics, you might want to look at the clinical trials registries. So when I do searches for physicians at the hospital, often I tell them which clinical trials databases to check, and I just suggest they check those as well, just to see if there's anything that's still in trial stage that hasn't been published a lot. It's becoming fewer and fewer these days because our publications are so quickly put together, even at midpoint in clinical trials. But still, it's good to look just to see if there's something out there we need to know about. Preprints became really popular during COVID. So I think Carolyn just told me today she's got a way to search the preprints better that she's going to share with me. So I don't search preprints for most of the stuff I work on, but I do search it, or I do use that for COVID and for things like that, and cutting edge treatment and really new concepts around medicine. Websites of relevant organizations. Once again, you can look at what other systematic reviews have done, or talk to a librarian, or talk to your team and say, are there certain organizations we should look to see if they have things? I teach how to search gray literature so that you can do a really good advanced Google search and get all the organizations in your search results. And I'm happy to show people some tips and tricks around that, depending on your topic. I love doing that. And other standard sources, you always look at the reference lists of your primary articles, not all your articles that you retrieve, but the primary ones where you looked at the full text. So you have gold articles, you go, wow, these are the best. Check those reference lists. There is a suggestion that you can also look at special theme issues of journals that focus on your topic, flip through those. I actually, in Indigenous health, there's a whole bunch of Indigenous health journals, really good Indigenous research journals, peer-reviewed, excellent, but they're not indexed in Medline and Embase. So I help the teams decide which journals they want to flip through, or I design search strategies to help them. That's really another important source of what we might call gray literature, because they're only indexed in Google. They're not really indexed in a database. So you can overlook some stuff. Citation chasing. So looking around at related articles in Scopus or Science Citation Index. And I'm going to show people how to do that when we look at translating your search strategy next week. Contacting our authors for unpublished data. This is important, that if you have found a trial in a trial registry and it hasn't been published yet, you can contact the authors and see if there's some data available that you can use. You can also, you also have to be aware too that I work with a lot of people who say, yeah, we want conference abstracts too. And in Embase, there's a lot of conference abstracts, like 25 or 30% in some topic areas. And so I teach people how to eliminate the conference abstracts, because you can end up writing to authors and nobody answers you back, or they haven't published it. They had a conference abstract, but they really didn't go further than that, so that their whole data is in the abstract. But you can do that depending on your topic. So there's an evaluation for today. I think Carolyn may have dropped it in the chat. If you want to click on the evaluation, only takes you about a minute or less, and provide some feedback on the session today. And I do want to thank you for your attendance. And I do hope that I see people next Tuesday. We're doing translation, how to translate from Medline to Embase or other databases. And we're doing covenants on next Thursday. So I'm hoping to see some of you there as well. Any other questions or comments?
Thanks, Janice. There was a question. What if you have already had an inclusion criteria that was set to up until 2022? Would you still need to update your search later on before publications?
I guess it depends on the topic. If you said we did our search up to the end of 2022, for example, so here we are in April, that was December, you'd probably be okay. If it's an area where there's a lot of publications, like most of the topics that I do searches for, there's not a lot published in a 4-month span. So I wouldn't bother updating it. But you have to realize too that the article that you put in now, that you submit now to the publisher, it might not get peer reviewed till November, right? And it might get published next January. So maybe you do want to do an update. If I'd done the searches in December, I wouldn't do an update in April unless it was a therapeutic and I needed to do an update, but it depends. So does that help, or did you want to? A lot of this is it depends, but it's always good to run it past a second person. Thank you very much, Carolyn. I really appreciate your assistance today.
I really appreciate the session. I learned a lot. I always learn a lot when you're teaching, Janice.
And if anybody else has any questions, you're free to unmute or put them in the chat, or you can follow up and just contact me or any of the other health sciences librarians. Yeah, really nice to see everybody today. Thanks for coming.